We begin the day with two leaders, one thumping his chest, the other noticeably mute. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is feeding the world tonight with triumphant images of himself and his country's latest missile test. Pyongyang claims the launch was a success. Now, military observers saying tonight that it is definitely a sign that North Korea is moving ahead with its goal of intercontinental ballistic missiles sooner rather than later. The fear is that those missiles would one day carry a nuclear weapon further than ever before, aimed at South Korea, Japan, and the west coast of the United States. Now, that would all be a game changer. And that brings us to U.S. President Donald Trump. The loud leader who says that he will walk the talk, well, he hasn't been talking or tweeting much at all. Unusual and perhaps unsettling if his allies in Seoul and Tokyo expect immediate clarity on what Washington plans to do. Well, the still quiet from the White House, is it a sign that the new president has realized what the stakes are beyond the scope of social media? Is there a coherent White House policy on how to deal with North Korea? In a moment, I'll ask a former top U.S. diplomat and ambassador to South Korea. Our coverage starts on the launch pad.
This is North Korea's new ballistic missile, named Pukguksong-2. It's a new type of strategic weapon system for Pyongyang and is said to be capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. The missile flew about 500 kilometers before landing in the Sea of Japan. Kim Jong-un was reportedly delighted with the test, saying it added to what he called his country's tremendous might. North Korea's state-run news agency broadcast this footage. On the streets of Pyongyang, these North Koreans welcomed the launch. Thanks to our dear leader's great leadership, our country has become stronger and equipped with great power to wipe out the United States. After watching the launch, I've realized how powerful our country is. For neighbours South Korea, the test was a clear provocation. The North is giving us a message that it will continue to provoke without giving up its ambitions for nuclear state status. Japan also condemned the launch right on its doorstep. It came as Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was meeting with US President Donald Trump. Trump said he stood behind Japan 100%. The test was condemned by North Korean ally China. Beijing has faced criticism for not putting enough pressure on North Korea to drop its nuclear program. But China suggested Washington should do more to find a solution. All relevant sides should refrain from doing anything that could provoke each other and escalate tensions on the peninsula, and keep restrained and jointly maintain peace and stability in the region. The United Nations Security Council is holding an emergency meeting to discuss the missile test. The UN has barred North Korea from any use of ballistic missile technology, but repeated sanctions appear to be having little effect.
Well, I'm joined now by a former top-level U.S. diplomat who knows both Koreas as well as anyone. Christopher Hill has been an ambassador to 4 countries, including South Korea. He was nominated by 3 U.S. presidents. He's also the author of Outpost, a Diplomat at Work. He is currently dean at the Korbel School of International Studies in Denver, Colorado, and that's where he joins us from. Good afternoon to you, Ambassador. Is there a Trump policy on North Korea tonight?
Well, I think it's a little clearer than it was, say, a week ago. First of all, a few things have happened. Recently, the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, went to South Korea and to Japan, and it's pretty clear that the main source of discussion in those 2 countries was North Korea. And during his visit, he really reaffirmed the U.S. alliance and reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to these countries. So that was, I think, a very positive development. Secondly, just before the Shinzo Abe visit, that is the visit of the Japanese Prime Minister to the U.S., President Trump reached out to President Xi of China and told the Chinese president that he, President Trump, now favors the one China policy. I don't think that's really anything extraordinary, because it was pretty clear that China was not going to accept a process by which the one China policy was somehow back on the bargaining table. But nonetheless, I think it represents a shift in President Trump's approach. And then he has this very warm and cordial summit with Prime Minister Abe, in the middle of which the North Koreans decide to test a missile. I want to stress that North Korea, they may be testing President Trump, to be sure, but I think what they're really doing is testing military equipment and signaling that they will continue to develop missiles and nuclear devices such that they will get to the point of having a deliverable nuclear weapon. So there's the question of what is the president going to do about it. And
well, let me ask you this, Ambassador.
I think they're just beginning to formulate something.
Let me just interrupt for a second and ask you just about the timing of all of this. I mean, because do you think this is all a coincidence, particularly the fact that we have the U.S. president saying that he will respect the one China policy, then he's receiving the prime minister of Japan, and then all of this, and then at the same time, we see this missile launch by North Korea. I mean, it looks a little bit more than just coincidence. Or what's your feeling about that?
Well, it's often been said that in life there's no such thing as a coincidence, and probably North Korea was trying to provoke a little. After all, they knew the timing of the Japanese prime minister's trip to the States. But I want to emphasize what they're really testing here is not necessarily the new U.S. president, but rather military equipment. They really don't care what we think. They don't care what the Japanese think. And they don't care what China thinks. So I think it's pretty clear that they are moving ahead with this military program. The question is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. What should we do,
Well,
Ambassador?
I think the first thing we need to do is to hold our allies close. And I think in that regard, I think it was a very good thing to have Prime Minister Abe there. Secondly, though, we've got to work closely with the South Koreans. And we are busy deploying a very advanced anti-ballistic missile system in South Korea. It'll probably be stood up later this year. I think that's a very important sign to the South Koreans that we mean what we say about doing the very best we can do. And then most importantly, or certainly as importantly, we need to have some quality and frankly some quantity in our negotiations and our diplomacy with China. It is not enough to say, China, you need to sort this out, because as we just saw from the Chinese spokesman, that becomes their line about us. America, you need to fix this thing. So clearly, we can't solve it without China. They can't solve it without us. But I think if we work together, establish some patterns of cooperation, show what we're interested in, what we're frankly not interested in, I think we can do a better job with China. And it begins with setting some priorities.
Ambassador, isn't it hard to know what we're interested in? I mean, we've got a new administration in Washington. We've got a similar situation. We've got, a political crisis in South Korea, basically a new government to be concerned about. We've got these two fresh governments who are going to be faced with basically what? More sanctions, talks maybe, or a military conflict. Do you think that they're going to have the patience and that they're going to opt for the sanctions and direct talks route, or do you foresee the chances increasing of a military conflict?
Well, first of all, military conflict is a last resort, but frankly, it has to be on the table. I mean, if they set up a missile with a nuclear weapon on it, I don't think we have much choice but to consider a very serious military response to that. So I don't think it's taken off the table at all. But I think there is more scope in the area of sanctions. I think China could probably do more in terms of financial institutions. They could probably do more in constraining energy supplies. They've done a lot more in the last couple of years, but more has to be done. But I think there's a lot of strategic mistrust now between the U.S. and China. This didn't just start with President Trump, but it certainly accelerated with President Trump. So I think he ought to get an envoy out there to China to sit down with the Chinese and talk about how we might go forward. I think if we have all these elements together, we can create the circumstances where North Korea understands it cannot go forward with a deliverable nuclear weapon.
And Ambassador, before we let you go, because we're running out of time here, I just want to ask you, though, do we have better information tonight about when North Korea will probably have a a nuclear weapon that it can deliver intercontinentally?
Well, I think most observers believe that they are a matter of months, more likely a couple of years away, and quite probably during the Trump administration. So he would have the rather undesirable task of going before the American people in 2020 and saying that during his watch, North Korea created a deliverable nuclear weapon. And he can blame President Obama, but I don't think that's going to fly very well.
All right. Ambassador Christopher Hill joining us tonight from Denver. Ambassador, thank you very much. We appreciate you taking the time to be on The Day.